Friends, thank you for being here today. We find ourselves at a critical juncture in American foreign policy and global economic stability. In recent days, the narrative emanating from Washington has been one of decisive action and imminent victory in the Middle East. However, a sober, data-driven analysis of the situation on the ground reveals a starkly different reality. The recent military maneuvers directed by the Trump administration against the Islamic Republic of Iran have fundamentally backfired. Rather than securing American interests, these actions have reportedly resulted in a staggering $100 billion loss in less than 2 weeks, destabilized crucial global supply chains, and placed American economic security in profound jeopardy. How did a strategy, explicitly intended to deliver a swift and decisive victory, unravel so catastrophically? Why are vital global shipping lanes now functionally closed? And why are American taxpayers and retirees being left to absorb the severe economic shock? To answer these questions, we must look past the political rhetoric and examine the geopolitical realities, the historical precedents, and the hard economic data. Let's begin by examining the core reason this strategy has unraveled. The failure stems from a fundamental, perhaps willful misreading of both the adversary and the complex architecture of the region. The architects of this campaign did not initiate hostilities blindly. They operated on a specific, predetermined theory of victory. Unfortunately, that theory was detached from empirical reality. To understand this, we have to look at the initial blueprint, which relied heavily on what defense analysts colloquially term the Venezuela Playbook. The underlying assumption was that by delivering a catastrophic, decapitating blow early in the conflict, eliminating senior Iranian leadership via targeted strikes, the United States could collapse the Iranian government's morale and watch the Islamic Republic implode from within. Policymakers hypothesized that a leadership vacuum would paralyze the military apparatus, rendering a coordinated response impossible. For those of us who remember the lead-up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq, or even the flawed intelligence paradigms of the Vietnam era, this reliance on best-case scenarios is chillingly familiar. It assumes that an adversary's internal political structure is as fragile as glass, waiting only for an American hammer to shatter it. However, the reality on the ground proved that this intelligence assumption was entirely incorrect. The top leadership of Iran was not decimated. The Ayatollah remains in power, and the governmental structure has not been disrupted beyond its capacity for recovery. What the architects of this strike failed to appreciate is the intentional redundancy built into the Iranian state. Following the devastating Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, Tehran purposefully structured its military and intelligence apparatus, specifically the dual-track system of the conventional military, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, to survive precisely this kind of decapitation strategy. Command and control in Iran is highly decentralized by design. When top commanders are eliminated, lower-ranking officers are pre-authorized and trained to step seamlessly into their roles. Furthermore, the administration critically miscalculated the sociological response of the Iranian populace. The strategy assumed that the pressure of military strikes would embolden the Iranian citizenry to rise up and overthrow their government. Instead, we are witnessing a textbook example of the rally round the flag effect. According to analysis from multiple regional observers and international journalists on the ground, the U.S. strikes have generated a profound wave of nationalist unity inside Iran. Even segments of the population, who were previously highly critical of the regime, those who protested economic conditions or strict social laws in recent years, have temporarily shelved their domestic grievances in the face of external bombardment. By attacking sovereign territory, the administration paradoxically strengthened the very government it was attempting to destabilize, handing Tehran a vital lifeline of domestic legitimacy. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of this strategic failure is that it was entirely predictable, and indeed, it was predicted. Prior to the commencement of these strikes, a document produced by the National Intelligence Council, representing the synthesized input of all 18 U.S. intelligence agencies, reportedly concluded that a preemptive war with Iran was destined to fail. This was not the opinion of partisan pundits. It was the empirical assessment of the United States' premier career intelligence professionals. Just as analysts warned about the lack of concrete evidence for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, warnings were issued regarding the resilience of the Iranian state and the high probability of regional blowback. These warnings were evidently ignored by policymakers seeking a rapid, politically expedient foreign policy victory. But the consequences of this strategic miscalculation are not confined to the deserts of the Middle East. They are creating a profound domestic economic fallout. The financial repercussions of this conflict are already migrating rapidly from the battlefield directly to the American homeland, targeting the wallets, savings, and retirement security of the American people. First, we must address the rapid and largely unsustainable military expenditure. Iranian officials, in translated and verified statements largely ignored by mainstream domestic press, have publicly stated that the U.S. military campaign has already cost American taxpayers an estimated $100 billion. While we must always approach adversary figures with analytical skepticism, the operational math makes this figure highly plausible. Modern warfare is exorbitantly expensive. The deployment of carrier strike groups, the continuous rotation of combat aircraft, the logistical supply chains required to maintain a forward posture, and the utilization of precision-guided munitions burn through capital at an astonishing rate. We are witnessing a massive unbudgeted expenditure that is instantly increasing the federal deficit. This rapid expenditure is clearly reflected in the sudden surge of market activity among major defense contractors. While defense conglomerates profit, the American taxpayer is saddled with the bill. Beyond these direct military costs, the administration has jeopardized the single most critical artery of the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's total crude oil supply moves through this narrow waterway. Today, because of the cascading escalation initiated by the U.S. strikes, that strait is functionally closed to commercial transit. When a sovereign entity with advanced anti-ship capabilities threatens the strait, global maritime insurance syndicates in London instantly recalibrate their risk models. War risk premiums for oil tankers skyrocket to commercially unviable levels, and shipping conglomerates simply refuse to transit the area. The results are immediate and severe. Major OPEC producers, including Kuwait and Qatar, have already announced precautionary reductions to oil and refinery output because they physically cannot export their products safely. For Americans navigating their retirement years, who rely on the stability of 401ks, IRAs, and pension funds, this development is particularly alarming. The broader financial market has not yet fully priced in the reality of a prolonged, open-ended conflict. Currently, the energy sector is experiencing extreme volatility. While some domestic producers might see short-term windfalls from rising crude prices, the broader market relies on stable energy costs to function efficiently. If the Strait of Hormuz remains restricted, the resulting supply chain disruptions will trigger a contraction in global manufacturing, retail, and transportation sectors. Your retirement portfolio is exposed not just to the energy sector, but to the entire downstream economy that depends on predictable fuel prices. When the market realizes that the administration's promise of a short war is an illusion, the repricing of equities could be sudden and brutal. And for those of us who lived through the 1970s, the specter of oil shocks and gas lines is a potent memory, one that is rapidly resurfacing at the pump. We understand intrinsically that energy prices dictate the cost of everything else in the economy. Despite quiet, desperate efforts by the administration to lower global prices, such as the reported removal of sanctions on Russian oil to flood Asian markets with discounted crude, the laws of supply and demand remain unforgiving. The risk premium associated with the Middle East conflict is already being transferred directly to ordinary Americans. Every week, the strait remains contested, adds an estimated several dollars per barrel to global crude prices. This is effectively a massive regressive tax levied on the American consumer, threatening to reignite the inflationary fires that the Federal Reserve has spent years trying to extinguish. I want to pause here for a moment and ask those of you watching, do you remember the gas lines of 1973? Are you seeing those same economic warning signs in your local communities today? Please, share your experiences and observations in the comments below, because that historical memory is exactly what's missing from today's policy debates. Beyond our own borders, the administration went into this conflict operating under the assumption that it could contain the blast radius of its actions strictly to the U.S.-Iran binary. That assumption has failed completely, leading to widespread regional destabilization. The conflict has fractured the fragile geopolitical architecture of the entire Middle East, severely harming long-standing U.S. economic partners and allies. We see this clearly in Iran's asymmetric response, which has been masterfully calculated to exploit American vulnerabilities. Rather than engaging the vastly superior U.S. military in a conventional force-on-force domestic battle, Tehran has opted to export instability across the Persian Gulf. By utilizing their sophisticated proxy networks and advanced drone capabilities, the Iranian Guard has begun striking soft, high-value economic targets in neighboring states. Verified reports indicate strikes on commercial skyscrapers near Dubai, social security buildings in Kuwait City, and crucial fuel depots at Kuwait International Airport. This is a deliberate message to the region. If the United States uses your airspace or bases to attack Iran, your economic miracles will burn. Consequently, our Gulf allies are now paying a severe price for this American overreach. The Gulf monarchies have spent the last 2 decades and hundreds of billions of dollars attempting to transition their economies away from fossil fuel dependence. They have built gleaming, modern, investment-friendly city-states designed to attract global capital. They spent years cultivating American political favor, hosting U.S. military bases under the implicit promise of a protective security umbrella. Today, they are watching those investments quite literally come under fire. The U.S. action has transformed these allied nations from safe havens of commerce into active war zones. The panic in capitals like Doha is palpable. They realize that the administration has started a fire in their neighborhood and lacks the capacity to extinguish it. This profound betrayal of trust will have generational consequences for American diplomatic leverage in the region. Furthermore, we must look at the disastrous secondary effects in Iraq, which have effectively handed a strategic gift to Tehran. The United States still maintains a troop presence in Iraq, operating in an environment characterized by a highly delicate sectarian balance. The unilateral U.S. strikes have shattered this fragile equilibrium. The Iraqi parliament has erupted in fierce, publicly broadcast anti-American sentiment, with legislative members openly chanting "Death to America." By acting without regard for Iraqi sovereignty, the U.S. administration has alienated the moderate factions in Baghdad and driven the Iraqi political establishment directly into the arms of Tehran. We face the very real, immediate risk of Iraqi state-sponsored militias activating against American personnel stationed in the country. To fully grasp the magnitude of this unfolding crisis, we must look beyond the immediate tactical failures and understand the broader historical and geopolitical contagion at play. For those in our generation who remember the suffocating stagflation of the late 1970s, the current trajectory is a grim, unavoidable echo of the past. We learned half a century ago that American economic sovereignty is deeply vulnerable to Middle Eastern energy shocks. Yet here we are once again, watching as a localized conflict threatens to metastasize into a systemic global economic crisis. But the modern global economy is far more complex and intricately connected than it was during the Carter administration. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz does not exist in a vacuum. It triggers a domino effect across the world's most critical maritime arteries. With the Persian Gulf functionally contested, shipping conglomerates are increasingly forced to reevaluate transit through the adjacent Red Sea and the Suez Canal. When global freight is diverted around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa to avoid conflict zones, it adds thousands of miles, millions of dollars in excess fuel costs, and weeks of delay to a single voyage. This is not merely a logistical headache for multinational corporations. It functions as a hidden, insidious tax on nearly every consumer good that arrives on American shores. From essential pharmaceuticals to the delicate semiconductors that power our modern infrastructure, the velocity of global trade is dramatically slowing down. This intense supply chain friction virtually guarantees that inflation, which the Federal Reserve has fought so aggressively to tame, will become structurally embedded in the economy for the foreseeable future. We are not just importing oil, we are importing inflation. Furthermore, we must confront the uncomfortable reality of who actually benefits from this American entanglement. While the United States is bogged down managing a chaotic, multi-front crisis of its own making, our primary geopolitical rivals are quietly reaping the strategic dividends. In Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party is watching this strategic misstep with calculated satisfaction. As American diplomatic leverage literally burns in the Gulf, China is aggressively positioning itself as the rational, stable alternative. They are stepping into the diplomatic vacuum we created, brokering long-term energy security contracts with the very Gulf states that are currently dodging Iranian drones and systematically solidifying their influence over the global South. Similarly, in Moscow, the administration's distraction is a strategic windfall. The disruption of Middle Eastern crude effectively weaponizes the global energy market in Russia's favor, allowing them to finance their own sovereign objectives, while Washington is financially bleeding in the desert. We are exhausting our military readiness, depleting our advanced munitions stockpiles, and fracturing our regional alliances to manage an avoidable crisis, exactly at the critical moment when we should be pivoting our strategic focus to counter peer competitors on the global stage. By squandering American resources and credibility on a deeply flawed Middle Eastern adventure, the administration is not projecting strength. It is telegraphing profound vulnerability to the very adversaries who possess the actual capacity to challenge American hegemony. This raises a critical question, and I'm very curious to hear your take on it. What concerns you more right now, the immediate financial drain of this Middle Eastern conflict on our economy, or the long-term strategic advantage we're handing to Beijing and Moscow? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. So, where do we go from here? We are now faced with a reality in which every foundational assumption made by the administration at the start of this campaign has been tested against reality and proven definitively false. The adversary did not surrender, the government did not collapse, the war did not end in days, and global economic stability has been critically wounded. Moving forward, there is no middle road. The United States faces two starkly contrasting paths, and the choice made in the coming days will define the global economic landscape for the next decade. The first, and arguably the only rational path, is one of pragmatic de-escalation and realpolitik. Historically, the most productive diplomatic channel between Washington and Tehran has been the quiet intermediary track facilitated by the Sultanate of Oman. Through back-channel negotiations, a framework must be reached wherein Iran agrees to cease strikes on Gulf infrastructure and maritime shipping, and the United States agrees to halt its bombardment of Iranian territory. This would allow the Strait of Hormuz to tentatively reopen, stabilizing global oil prices and calming the equity markets. However, this path requires a commodity currently in short supply in Washington: political humility. It requires the administration to accept a return to the status quo ante, acknowledging that full Iranian capitulation is unachievable. It means swallowing pride, engaging in classic realpolitik, and prioritizing the economic survival of the American middle class over the optics of a flawless military victory. While difficult politically, pragmatism historically asserts itself when the financial costs become mathematically undeniable. If pride and political calculation prevent de-escalation, we default to the second path, a dangerous escalatory spiral. This is a scenario that historians of the First World War will recognize with dread. In this scenario, a tit-for-tat exchange spins out of control. An Iranian strike against a U.S. naval asset or a mass casualty event in a Gulf-allied nation triggers a massive formal U.S. military response against Iran's core infrastructure. In retaliation, the entire axis of resistance activates simultaneously across multiple fronts. Under these conditions, the Strait of Hormuz closes completely and indefinitely. Oil prices would surge to levels that fundamentally break the post-COVID economic recovery, triggering a severe, structural global recession. The United States would find itself hopelessly entangled in a multi-front, open-ended trillion-dollar Middle Eastern war. It is a profound irony that this is the exact type of costly generational quagmire that the American public across the political spectrum consistently votes to avoid. Ultimately, friends, statecraft is not a television show, and the bill for these actions is coming due. It cannot be managed through spin, bluster, or the confident repetition of falsehoods. When a military campaign built on deeply flawed assumptions meets a determined, entrenched adversary capable of asymmetric warfare, the outcomes are never clean, and they are never fast. We must ask ourselves hard questions in the days ahead. Is this administration genuinely eliminating a threat, or is it actively creating the conditions for a generation of new ones? When the staggering financial bill for this war arrives, and it will undeniably arrive, appearing in the cost of fuel, the diminishment of your retirement portfolio, and the explosion of the federal deficit, who will be held accountable? If the most senior intelligence analysts in the nation warned that this endeavor was destined to fail, and if the early results have yielded a closed global shipping lane and $100 billion in lost treasure, we must demand an answer to the most vital question of all. What exactly was the actual plan? The strength of the American Republic lies in an informed, prudent citizenry that demands accountability from its leaders, prioritizing empirical reality over political illusion. We must remain vigilant, protect our financial security, and demand a return to rational, data-driven foreign policy before the damage to our nation's future becomes irreversible. I read every single comment you leave on these videos. So tell me, who do you believe should be held accountable when the financial bill for this conflict finally comes due? Leave your perspective below, share this analysis with someone who needs to hear it, and thank you, as always, for your time and your wisdom today.